Margaret Price sat in the hard plastic chair and watched her grandson Kevin play with his toy spaceship. The 8-year-old boy made quiet whooshing sounds as he flew the little model around in circles. Margaret smiled. Even at 78 years old, she still loved watching children play. It reminded her of when her own 5 kids were young. Station Nexus was busy today. Hundreds of different alien species walked through the wide corridors. Some had scales, others had fur, and a few looked almost human except for their strange, colored skin or extra arms. Margaret had seen many aliens during her 3-day visit to the station. Her daughter Lisa worked here as a human liaison officer. Lisa helped solve problems between humans and alien traders. The waiting area outside the diplomatic offices was full of different species. Margaret could hear at least 6 different languages being spoken around her. A group of blue-skinned Altarians discussed shipping contracts in their musical voices. 3 spider-like arachnids clicked their mandibles while reviewing data tablets. Everyone seemed peaceful enough. Kevin looked up at his grandmother. "Grandma, can I go look at the big window?" Margaret glanced toward the huge observation window that showed the stars and passing ships. It was only 20 feet away and she could see him clearly from where she sat. "Stay where I can see you, honey." The boy ran toward the window, his toy spaceship still in his hand. Margaret watched him press his face against the thick glass and point at a massive cargo ship docking with the station. She remembered doing the same thing with all her children when they took their first space trips. Some things never changed, no matter how far from Earth you traveled. The peace in the waiting area broke when heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor. Margaret looked up to see a group of large reptilian aliens entering the diplomatic quarter. Their scales were dark, green and black, and they wore military-style armor. Each one stood at least 7 feet tall. The other aliens in the waiting area quickly moved out of their way. These were Zephyrians, Margaret realized. Lisa had told her about them. They were known for being aggressive and hard to deal with in negotiations. The Zephyrians believed that showing strength was the only way to get respect from other species. The lead Zephyrian, who had more decorations on his armor than the others, looked around the room with cold, yellow eyes. His forked tongue flicked out to taste the air. "Where are the station administrators? We have been waiting for 30 minutes. A nervous Centaurian clerk approached the group. His blue skin had turned pale with fear. "Commander Vextar, the administrators will see you in 10 minutes. Please take a seat and—" "We do not sit and wait like common traders," Vextar hissed. His voice was harsh and loud. "We are the Zephyrian delegation. You will get them now." The clerk's hands shook as he backed away. I will check on their status immediately." Margaret frowned. She had raised 5 children and managed a household for over 50 years. She knew a bully when she saw one. These Zephyrians were trying to scare everyone into giving them what they wanted. It was the same behavior she had seen from Playground, bullies and rude neighbors back on Earth. Kevin was still looking out the observation window when one of the Zephyrian guards noticed him. The alien soldier walked toward the boy with heavy steps. Margaret started to get up from her chair, but the Zephyrian was faster. "Human child," the guard growled. "Move away from the window. This area is now restricted." Kevin turned around, confused. "But my grandma said I could look at the ships." The Zephyrian leaned down toward Kevin, his yellow eyes narrowing. "I do not care what your grandma said, small human. Move now, or I will move you." Kevin took a step back, bumping into the window. His toy spaceship fell from his hands and clattered on the floor. "I'm sorry, I didn't know—" "Stupid child," the guard snarled. He reached out with one clawed hand and roughly pushed Kevin away from the window. The boy stumbled and fell hard on the metal floor. His toy spaceship broke into several pieces. Kevin started to cry. The sound echoed through the suddenly quiet waiting area. Every conversation stopped. Every alien in the room turned to look. Margaret Price stood up. The movement was slow and deliberate. She rose from her chair like a force of nature awakening. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun. Her clothes were simple and practical. She wore no weapons and carried no authority badge. She was just a 78-year-old grandmother from Earth. But something in the way she stood made every Creature in the room, take notice. Margaret walked toward Kevin with calm, measured steps. Her soft shoes made no sound on the metal floor, but somehow her approach seemed louder than the Zephyrian's heavy boots. She knelt down next to her grandson and helped him sit up. "Are you hurt, honey?" she asked quietly, checking Kevin for injuries. "My spaceship broke." Kevin sniffled, pointing at the scattered pieces. "We can fix that later," Margaret said. She stood up and faced the Zephyrian guard who had pushed her grandson. The alien was more than 2 feet taller than her. His armor made him look even bigger. His claws were as long as her fingers. His teeth were sharp enough to bite through metal. He could have easily picked her up with one hand. Margaret looked up at him with calm blue eyes. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but clear. Every being in the room could hear her perfectly. "Young man," she said, "I think you owe my grandson an apology." The Zephyrian guard laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. "Foolish old human. Your species is weak. Your child should learn to obey his betters." Margaret tilted her head slightly. Her expression did not change, but something shifted in the air around her. The temperature seemed to drop a few degrees. Other aliens in the waiting area began moving away without really knowing why. "I see," Margaret said. Her voice was still quiet, still polite. "You think pushing children makes you strong." She took one step closer to the massive alien. He had to look down to meet her eyes, but somehow it felt like she was looking down at him. "Let me tell you something about strength," Margaret continued. "I raised 5 children. I buried my husband after 49 years of marriage. I worked 2 jobs to keep my family fed. I've dealt with bullies, criminals, and politicians, and right now, I'm dealing with you." The Zephyrian guard's laugh died in his throat. Other aliens were backing away faster now. Even Commander Vexistar was watching the confrontation with growing concern. Margaret's voice remained calm, but her words carried the weight of decades. "You hurt my grandson. You made him cry. And you think that makes you powerful." She smiled. It was not a warm grandmother smile. It was something else entirely. "You have no idea what you just did." The silence in the waiting area stretched like a tight wire. Margaret Price stood facing the 7-foot-tall Zephyrian guard while her grandson, Kevin, wiped tears from his cheeks. Every alien in the room seemed frozen in place, afraid to move or speak. Commander Vextar stepped forward, his yellow eyes shifting between Margaret and his guard. "Old human, you forget your place. We are the Zephyrian delegation. You will show respect." Margaret turned her calm blue eyes toward the commander. "Respect is earned, not demanded, and anyone who hurts children has earned nothing from me. The Commander's scales darkened with anger. He had conquered 12 worlds and commanded thousands of warriors. No weak human elder would speak to him this way. "Guards, remove this human from our sight." But something strange happened. The Zephyrian guards hesitated. They looked at Margaret and felt something they had never experienced before. It was not fear exactly, but something deeper. Something that told them this small human was dangerous in ways they could not understand. The Centaurian clerk who had been cowering near the wall suddenly found his voice. "Commander, perhaps we should wait for station security to... We handle our own problems," Vextar snarled. But even as he spoke, he noticed that more humans had appeared in the corridor outside the waiting area. They were not running or shouting. They were simply arriving one by one, drawn by something the aliens could not see or hear. Margaret knelt down next to Kevin again. "Honey, go sit by that nice blue man over there. Grandma needs to have a talk with these visitors." Kevin nodded and walked toward the Centaurian clerk, who automatically moved to protect the child. The clerk did not know why he felt the need to do this, but something about the situation made him want to keep the boy safe. Captain Roy Henderson was having lunch in the station's main cafeteria when his communication device buzzed. The message was short and came from his mother back on Earth. "Roy, there's a grandmother named Margaret Price on Station Nexus who might need help. Her grandson Kevin was threatened. Please check on them." Roy frowned. His mother had never sent him a message like this before. How did she even know about Margaret Price? And why did the message make him feel like he needed to drop everything and run to the diplomatic quarter? He was not the only one receiving strange messages. Throughout Station Nexus, humans began getting calls, texts, and personal messages from family members back home. The messages were all slightly different, but they carried the same basic information. Margaret Price, Kevin, diplomatic quarter, trouble. Lieutenant Sarah Murphy was checking cargo manifests when her grandmother called. "Sarah, dear, I just heard from my friend Dorothy that there's a situation on your station. A woman named Margaret and her grandson need help. Engineer Pete Collins got a message from his sister. There's a grandmother on your station who might be in danger. Mom says we need to look out for our own." Nurse Linda Hayes received a call from her aunt. "Linda, I know this sounds strange, but there's a human family in trouble on Station Nexus. Can you make sure they're okay?" Within 30 minutes of the confrontation in the waiting area, every human on Station Nexus had received at least one message from family back on Earth. None of them could explain how the information had spread so quickly across the galaxy. None of them questioned it either. When family called and said someone needed help, you helped. Captain Roy Henderson arrived at the diplomatic quarter first. He saw the crowd of aliens pressed against the walls and the group of Zephyrians standing in the center of the room. He saw Margaret Price facing down creatures twice her size while a small boy sat safely with the station clerk. "Ma'am," Roy said quietly as he approached Margaret, "I'm Captain Henderson. Is everything all right here?" Margaret smiled at him. It was her warm grandmother smile, nothing like the cold expression she had shown the Zephyrians. "Hello, Captain. These young men seem to think it's acceptable to push children around. I was just explaining why that's not true." Commander Vextar turned toward the human captain. "This human female is interfering with official Zephyrian business. Remove her immediately." Roy looked at the broken toy spaceship on the floor, then at Kevin's tear-stained face, then at Margaret's calm expression. He had served in space for 15 years. He had seen battles and diplomatic crises, but he had never seen anything that made him as angry as the sight of a child who had been hurt by adults who should have protected him. "I don't think that's going to happen," Roy said quietly. More humans began arriving in the corridor. They came from different sections of the station. Engineers, traders, medical staff, security officers, and civilian passengers. They were not armed, and they were not making threats. They were simply there, forming a growing crowd outside the diplomatic quarter. Lieutenant Sarah Murphy entered the waiting area and positioned herself near the observation window. Engineer Pete Collins took a spot by the main entrance. Nurse Linda Hayes went straight to Kevin and began checking him for injuries. The aliens in the room began to understand that something was happening. The humans were not attacking or even being aggressive, but they were gathering, and their presence was changing the atmosphere in ways that made every non-human species nervous. Administrator Kelthon, the Centaurian bureaucrat in charge of the diplomatic quarter, finally arrived to see what was causing the commotion. He found his waiting area filled with tense aliens and a growing number of humans who all seemed focused on one elderly woman and a small boy. "What is the meaning of this?" Kelthon demanded. Margaret looked at him with the same calm expression she had used on everyone else. "Administrator, I assume you have regulations about the safety of visitors to your station." "Of course we do, and I assume those regulations include protecting children from being assaulted by adult visitors." Kelthon's blue skin paled as he realized what had happened. "There was an assault? Your Zephyrian guests seem to believe that pushing children is acceptable behavior," Margaret said. "I disagree." Commander Vextar stepped forward angrily. "This is ridiculous. We barely touched the human child, and now these humans are trying to intimidate us." Margaret tilted her head slightly. "Intimidate you? Captain Henderson, are you intimidating anyone?" "No, ma'am," Roy replied. "Just making sure everyone is safe." "Lieutenant Murphy, are you being threatening?" "Not at all, ma'am. Just standing here." "Engineer Collins, any intimidation happening on your part?" "No, ma'am. Just checking on the situation." Margaret turned back to Commander Vexistar. "I don't see any intimidation. I see humans who care about the safety of children. If that makes you uncomfortable, perhaps you should examine your own behavior. The station's AI system, AREA, began detecting unusual patterns in the human population. Stress hormones were elevated but controlled. Heart rates were increased but steady. Movement patterns showed coordination without apparent communication. The humans were displaying what the AI could only classify as protective formation behavior. But the most interesting reading came from the elderly human female at the center of the situation. Margaret Price showed no signs of stress or fear. Her heart rate was normal. Her voice patterns indicated complete calm and control. According to every scanner on the station, she was the least threatening person in the room, which made her the most dangerous person any of the aliens had ever encountered. On Earth, in a small house in Ohio, Dorothy Price hung up the phone after talking to her sister Margaret on Station Nexus. The call had been brief. Margaret had simply said that Kevin was fine, but there had been some trouble with aliens who did not understand proper behavior around children. Dorothy sat in her kitchen for a moment thinking. Then she picked up the phone again. "Betty? It's Dorothy. I need you to call your son Mike. He's commanding that mining operation near the Vega system, isn't he?" 3 hours later, Captain Mike Wilson received a call from his mother while his ship was hauling asteroid ore to a processing station. His mother rarely called him during work hours. "Mike, honey, I just talked to my friend Dorothy. Her sister Margaret is having some trouble on Station Nexus. Some aliens were rude to her grandson. I know it's not exactly on your route, but..." Mike stared at his communication screen. His mother was asking him to change course for a woman he had never met because some aliens had been rude to a child. It should have sounded crazy. Instead, it sounded like the most important thing he could possibly do. "I'll head that way, Mom, don't worry." Back on Earth, Betty Wilson called her daughter Helen, who had married into the Rodriguez family. The Rodriguez family owned a small fleet of trading ships that worked the outer colonies. "Helen, dear, there's a situation. A grandmother named Margaret Price on Station Nexus needs support. Can you reach out to Carlos and see if any of his ships are in that area?" Helen Rodriguez made the call without question. Within an hour, 3 Rodriguez family trading vessels had changed their flight plans to include stops at Station Nexus. The pattern repeated across human space. Mothers called sons. Aunts called nieces. Grandmothers called anyone they could reach. The messages were always similar. Margaret Price. Station Nexus. Family in trouble. Help if you can. Nobody questioned the requests. Nobody asked for proof or details. When family said someone needed help, you helped. It was that simple. Captain Sue Martinez was patrolling the border between human and Altarian space when she received a message from her mother. "Sue, there's a grandmother on Station Nexus who might need backup. I know you're busy, but family is family." Sue looked at her navigation charts. Station Nexus was 6 hours away at maximum speed. She would need to explain the course change to her crew and file a report with Fleet Command about why she was abandoning her patrol route. "Helm, set course for Station Nexus, maximum speed." Her lieutenant looked confused. "Captain, we don't have any orders to go there." "We do now," Sue said quietly. Lieutenant Commander Jake Phillips was overseeing repairs on his ship when his grandmother called. She was 92 years old and lived in a retirement home in Florida. She had never called him at work before. "Jake, sweetie, I heard from my friend Rose that there's a problem on one of those space stations. A woman named Margaret and her little grandson. Rose says the family needs to stick together." Jake felt something twist in his stomach. His grandmother sounded worried in a way he had never heard before. "What kind of problem, Grandma?" "Some aliens hurt the little boy, made him cry. His grandmother is handling it, but she might need help." 20 minutes later, Jake's ship was heading toward Station Nexus. The Galactic Council monitoring station picked up the first unusual readings 3 hours after the incident on Station Nexus. Human ships throughout the galaxy were changing course. Some were military vessels. Others were trading ships, mining operations, or passenger transports. Council analyst Zekamar studied the movement patterns on his screens. "This is unusual. The humans appear to be converging on Station Nexus, but we have no record of military orders or emergency broadcasts." His supervisor, a 4-armed hexapod named Consul Theorix, examined the data. "How many ships are involved?" At least 50 so far, and the number is growing. They're coming from every direction. Some are traveling from the far edge of human space. Any explanation from Human Command? None. When we contacted Human Fleet Headquarters, they said they were not aware of any coordinated movement, but they also said they would not interfere with their ship's decisions. Thyrix's 4 eyes blinked in confusion. Ships cannot change course without orders. There must be some communication network we are not detecting. But there was no hidden communication network. There were only phone calls between family members, mothers calling children, sisters calling brothers, friends calling friends, a web of personal connections that stretched across the galaxy and moved faster than any official communication system. On the merchant vessel Golden Star, Captain Tom Bradley received a call from his wife. "Tom, my mother just called. There's a situation on Station Nexus. A human grandmother and her grandson need support." Tom looked at his cargo schedule. He was supposed to deliver agricultural supplies to a colony 3 systems away. The delivery was important and the colonists were counting on the food shipment. "Change course for Station Nexus," he told his crew. "The colonists will have to wait." The alien passengers on civilian transport ships began to notice that something was wrong. The ships were changing direction without explanation. When they asked the human crew members about it, they received answers that made no sense. "Family business," the humans would say, or "someone needs help." When the aliens pressed for details, the humans would just shrug and say, "You wouldn't understand." A Zephyrian merchant on the transport vessel New Horizon demanded to speak to the captain when he learned they were going to Station Nexus instead of their scheduled destination. "This is unacceptable," the Zephyrian hissed. "I have business appointments to keep. You cannot simply change course because of some human personal matter." Captain Lisa Chen looked at the alien with calm eyes. "Sir, there's a grandmother and a child who might be in danger. Everything else can wait." "This is ridiculous. What is one human child compared to important business?" The captain's expression did not change, but something shifted in the air. Other human crew members turned to look at the Zephyrian. Their faces were polite but cold. "Sir," Captain Chen said quietly, "I suggest you return to your cabin and wait for us to reach Station Nexus." The Zephyrian found himself backing away without knowing why. There was something in the human's expressions that made him very uncomfortable. By the 6th hour after the incident, the Galactic Council was tracking over 100 human ships heading toward Station Nexus. Military vessels, merchant ships, mining operations, passenger transports, and private craft were all converging on the station. The aliens began to understand that they were witnessing something they had never seen before. The humans were not following military orders or government commands. They were responding to something deeper, something that connected them across vast distances and made them drop everything to help people they had never met. Station Nexus itself began receiving requests for docking space from dozens of incoming human ships. The station administrator, Kelthon, found himself approving emergency docking permits without really understanding why. In the diplomatic quarter, Margaret Price sat calmly with Kevin, while a growing crowd of humans filled the corridors outside. She had received messages from her daughter Lisa, who was rushing back from a trade meeting. She had heard from her son Robert, whose ship would arrive in 4 hours. Her nephew Danny was coming with his crew. Her old neighbor from Earth, whose grandson worked on a mining station, had somehow heard about the situation and was sending help. Margaret smiled as she helped Kevin put together a new toy spaceship that one of the arriving humans had brought him. The boy was happy again, playing and laughing with the kind human adults who kept stopping by to check on him. The aliens in the waiting area watched nervously as more humans arrived every few minutes. The humans were not threatening anyone. They were polite and quiet, but their presence was growing stronger, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with an energy that made every non-human species want to hide. Commander Vextar and his Zephyrian guards had retreated to their assigned quarters and locked the doors. They told themselves they were not afraid of weak humans, but none of them wanted to face Margaret Price again, and more ships were still coming. Station Nexus had never seen anything like it. In the 12 hours since the incident in the diplomatic quarter, Over 200 human ships had arrived at the station. They came from every direction: military vessels, trading ships, mining, barges, passenger transports, and private craft all requested docking space. Station Administrator Kelthon stood in his control room and watched the displays showing ship traffic around the station. Red dots filled the screens, each one representing a human vessel waiting for permission to dock or already attached to the station's ports. "Sir," his assistant said nervously, "we're at 150% capacity. We don't have space for any more ships." Kelthon stared at the screens. "Then why are they still coming?" Outside the station, human ships formed organized patterns in space. The military vessels took defensive positions around the civilian craft. Trading ships shared supplies with smaller vessels that had traveled long distances. Mining barges offered fuel to anyone who needed it. Nobody had given orders for this coordination. It was simply happening. Captain Mike Wilson's mining ship had arrived 6 hours ago. He had managed to get a docking port and was now walking through the station's corridors toward the diplomatic quarter. Along the way, he met other humans who were all heading in the same direction. "You hear about Margaret Price?" asked a woman in a merchant captain's uniform. "Yes, ma'am. My mother asked me to check on her." "Same here. I'm Captain Chen from the trading vessel Morning Star." They walked together, joining a steady stream of humans moving through the station. The aliens they passed pressed against the walls to let them by. Nobody was being rude or aggressive, but there was something about the humans that made other species step aside automatically. In the diplomatic quarter, Margaret Price sat in the same plastic chair where this had all started. Kevin was playing with several new toys that visiting humans had brought him. The boy was surrounded by gift bags, snacks, and small presents from people who had never met him before, but had heard he had been hurt. "Look, Grandma," Kevin said, holding up a small model starship. "Captain Rodriguez gave me this one. It's from his home planet." Margaret smiled and ruffled his hair. "That's very nice, honey. Make sure you thank everyone properly." The waiting area had been transformed. Humans filled every available space, but they were not crowding or pushing. They had organized themselves naturally. Some sat in chairs, others stood along the walls, and a few helped Kevin play with his toys. They talked quietly among themselves, sharing stories about their journeys to the station and asking about Margaret's family. The alien species that had been in the waiting area when the trouble started were now clustered in one corner, watching the humans with growing confusion and fear. The Centaurian clerk who had first tried to calm Commander Vextar kept glancing nervously at the growing crowd. "This is impossible," whispered an Altarian trader to his companion. "How did so many humans get here so quickly? And why are they all focused on one old female and a child?" His companion, a spider-like arachnid, clicked her mandibles thoughtfully. "My people have legends about species that share collective consciousness. Perhaps humans are more connected than we realized." But it was not collective consciousness. It was something simpler and more powerful. It was family. Captain Sue Martinez had arrived with her patrol ship 2 hours ago. She found herself standing next to Captain Tom Bradley, whose merchant vessel had been delayed 3 days because he changed course to come here. "You ever meet this Margaret Price before?" Tom asked quietly. "Never heard of her until my mother called," Sue replied. "But that doesn't matter, does it?" Tom shook his head. "No, it doesn't." They understood something that the aliens could not grasp. When family called and said someone needed help, you helped. It did not matter if you had never met the person. It did not matter if it was inconvenient or expensive or dangerous. Family was family, and that extended to every human who had ever been born. In their locked quarters, the Zephyrian delegation was having an emergency meeting. Commander Vextar paced back and forth while his guards sat around a metal table. "This is some kind of human military operation," Vextar insisted. "They are trying to intimidate us into accepting their trade demands." Guard Captain Sektar looked at his commander with doubt in his yellow eyes. "Sir, these do not appear to be military ships. Most of them are civilian vessels, and they are not making any demands." "Then what are they doing?" "They seem to be visiting. Bringing gifts to the child, checking on the old female, acting like... Sektar paused, searching for the right words. Acting like family. Vextar stopped pacing. That is impossible. Humans do not share family bonds across such distances. No species does that. But even as he said it, Vextar remembered something from his own culture. Zephyrian military doctrine included ancient laws about protecting elders and children, laws that his people had abandoned in their pursuit of conquest and power, laws that said harming the young or disrespecting the old was the behavior of animals, not civilized beings. Outside, the Zephyrian quarters, human voices could be heard in the corridors. They were not angry or threatening. They were talking about normal things. Work schedules, family news, the journey to the station. But underneath the casual conversations was something else. A shared understanding that they were here for a purpose. Lieutenant, Commander Jake Phillips had brought his crew with him when he docked 4 hours ago. Now he stood in the diplomatic quarter with 30 other humans, watching Margaret Price help Kevin arrange his new toys in neat rows. She doesn't look like much, one of his crew members whispered. Jake glanced at the young man. What do you mean? I mean, she's just a little old lady. Why are we all here for her? Jake looked at Margaret again. She was small and elderly, with gray hair and soft clothes. She looked like any grandmother you might see in a park or shopping center back on Earth. But when she had stood up to face those Zephyrian guards, something had changed in the universe. Because she's family, Jake said simply. And family protects family. The Galactic Council emergency session had been going on for 6 hours. Representatives from dozens of species sat in the Great Chamber, staring at displays that showed the continuing movement of human ships toward Station Nexus. The situation is unprecedented, announced Council Chairman Veltar, a tall, thin being with silver skin. We have over 300 human vessels converging on a single location without any official orders or emergency declaration. What are their demands? Asked the Altarian representative. They have made no demands. They appear to be simply gathering. For what purpose? Unknown. The only information we have is that there was a minor incident involving a human child, and the Zephyrian delegation. The Zephyrian representative, General Kexnoth, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The incident was trivial. One of my guards merely moved a human child away from a restricted area. Moved how? Asked the Centaurian representative. General Kexnoth hesitated. There may have been brief physical contact. The chamber fell silent. Every species in the council understood what that meant. The Zephyrians had hurt a human child, and now hundreds of human ships were gathering in response. I suggest, said the wise old hexapod consul Theorix, that the Zephyrian delegation consider offering an apology. We do not apologize to inferior species, General Kexnoth snapped. The chamber fell silent again. This time the silence carried a different weight. Every representative present had heard stories about human behavior when their young were threatened. Most had dismissed these stories as exaggerations. Now they were beginning to understand that the stories might be true. Back on Station Nexus, Margaret Price stood up from her chair and walked to the observation window. Kevin followed her, pressing his face against the glass to look at all the ships surrounding the station. Grandma, why are all these people here? Kevin asked. Margaret put her hand on his shoulder and smiled. Because someone hurt you, honey, and that's not acceptable. Outside the window, more ships were arriving every hour. The space around Station Nexus was filling with human vessels of every size and type. They hung in space like protective guardians, waiting to see what would happen next. Margaret looked at the ships and felt a warm satisfaction. She had not asked for this gathering. She had not called for help or demanded justice. She had simply stood up when someone hurt her grandson, and her family had responded. All of her family, every human being in the galaxy who had ever heard the words, "That family protects family." The universe was about to learn what that really meant. Admiral Patricia Wells arrived at Station Nexus in a small shuttle, not a warship. She came alone, wearing civilian clothes instead of her military uniform. In her hands, she carried a simple metal box that smelled like home-baked cookies. Patricia, was Margaret Price's eldest daughter. She commanded the human fleet in this sector of space, but today she was not an admiral. Today she was a daughter who had heard that someone threatened her mother and nephew. The shuttle bay was crowded with humans who had come to meet every arriving ship. When Patricia stepped out of her craft, Captain Mike Wilson was there to greet her. "Admiral Wells, I'm Captain Wilson. My mother sent me to help." Patricia smiled. "Thank you, Captain. And please, just call me Patricia today. How is my mother?" "She's fine, ma'am. Still sitting in the diplomatic quarter with your nephew Kevin, but I think she's waiting for you." They walked through corridors filled with humans, merchants, miners, military officers, engineers, and families with children, all moved through the station with quiet purpose. The alien population had mostly retreated to their quarters or gathered in small, nervous groups. In the diplomatic quarter, Margaret Price looked up as her daughter entered the room. The two women hugged while Kevin ran to his aunt with excited stories about all the presents he had received. "Aunt Patricia, look at all my new toys. And Captain Rodriguez taught me how to say hello in 3 different alien languages." Patricia knelt down to Kevin's level. "That's wonderful, sweetie. Are you okay? Nobody hurt you too badly?" Kevin shook his head. "It just scared me when the big lizard man pushed me. But Grandma made it better." Patricia looked at her mother. Margaret sat calmly in her plastic chair, surrounded by hundreds of humans who had traveled from across the galaxy. She looked exactly like what she was, a 78-year-old grandmother who had spent the day taking care of her grandson. "Mom," Patricia said quietly, "you know there are over 400 ships out there now?" Margaret nodded. "I heard. Nice to know family cares. The Galactic Council is having emergency meetings. 3 species have filed formal complaints about human intimidation tactics. The Zephyrians are demanding protection from what they call an unprovoked military response." "Military response?" Margaret raised an eyebrow. "I don't see any military here, just family." Patricia looked around the room. Captain Sue Martinez was showing Kevin how to fold paper airplanes. Engineer Pete Collins was sharing pictures of his own grandchildren with a group of miners. Lieutenant Commander Jake Phillips was quietly organizing a schedule so that humans could take turns visiting with Margaret and Kevin without crowding the waiting area. "You're right, Mom. It's not military at all." Station Administrator Kelthon approached them nervously. His blue skin was pale with stress and his hands shook slightly. "Excuse me, Admiral Wells, Mrs. Price. I need to speak with you about the situation." "What situation?" Margaret asked innocently. The gathering. The ships. The humans. We need to resolve this before it gets out of hand." Margaret tilted her head. "Gets out of hand? Everyone is being very polite. Has anyone caused trouble?" Kelthon fumbled for words. "No, but there are so many of you. And the other species are frightened." "Frightened of what?" Of what you might do." Margaret stood up slowly. Around the room, conversations quieted as humans turned to listen. "Administrator, what exactly do you think we're going to do?" I don't know. That's what makes it frightening." Patricia stepped forward. "Administrator, may I suggest we call a meeting? Get everyone together and talk about this like civilized beings?" Within an hour, the main conference room on Station Nexus was filled with representatives from every species present. The Galactic Council had sent an emergency mediator, a wise old hexapod named Consul Thyrix. The Zephyrian delegation sat at one end of the table, still refusing to come out from behind their guards. Margaret Price sat at the other end of the table. She had changed into a nice dress for the meeting, but she was still just a grandmother holding her grandson's hand. Beside her sat Patricia, Captain Henderson, and a dozen other humans who had been chosen to represent the hundreds of others waiting outside. Consul Thyrix opened the meeting with formal words about peaceful resolution and interspecies cooperation. Then he turned to Margaret. "Mrs. Price, perhaps you could explain what your people want." Margaret looked confused. "Want? We don't want anything." "Then why are there over 400 human ships surrounding this station?" "Because someone hurt my grandson." Commander Vextar finally spoke up from behind his guards. "The child was barely touched. This response is completely unreasonable. Margaret's calm blue eyes focused on the Zephyrian commander. You think hurting children is reasonable? It was not significant harm. Any harm to a child is significant. The room fell silent. Every species present began thinking about their own cultures, their own values about protecting the young. The spider-like arachnids remembered their ancient codes about nurturing hatchlings. The Altarians thought of their songs about cherishing their children. Even the Centaurians had strict laws about child welfare. Only the Zephyrians had forgotten these basic truths in their pursuit of military dominance. Consul Thyrix leaned forward with his 4 eyes focused on Margaret. Mrs. Price, your species' response to this incident has been unprecedented. Can you help us understand why so many humans came here? Margaret smiled. It's simple. When family is threatened, family responds. But most of these humans are not related to you. All humans are family. The alien representatives looked at each other in confusion. Consul Thyrix tried again. But surely you don't mean that literally. These people came from different planets, different colonies. Patricia spoke up. Consul, with respect, I think you're missing the point. When my mother says all humans are family, she means it. We may not share blood, but we share something else. We share the understanding that children should be protected, that elders should be respected, and that families take care of each other. Captain Henderson nodded. Every human here received word that a grandmother and child needed help. Nobody questioned it. Nobody asked for proof or official orders. Family said help was needed, so we came. Commander Vextar made a disgusted sound. This is weakness. True strength comes from individual power, not this group sentiment. Margaret looked at him with something that might have been pity. Commander, you lead how many warriors? 5,000 of the finest soldiers in Zephyrian space. And if something happened to you, how many of them would come to help you personally? Vextar hesitated. They would follow orders. I'm not asking about orders. I'm asking about choice. If you were in trouble and needed help, how many would come because they cared about you? The silence stretched uncomfortably. Everyone in the room knew the answer. Margaret continued gently. I never gave an order. I never asked for help. I simply stood up when someone hurt my grandson. And my family came, all of my family. Every human who heard that children were being threatened responded the only way they knew how. She looked around the table at the alien representatives. You want to know what humans want? We want to live in a universe where children can play safely, where elders are treated with respect, where families can take care of each other without fear. And if someone threatens that? Asked Consul Thyrix, quietly. Margaret's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her eyes. Then they learn why you should never make a human grandparent stand up. Commander Vextar finally understood. The humans were not displaying military might or political power. They were showing something far more dangerous, the unlimited reach of beings who would cross the galaxy to protect their family. Vextar began, then stopped. His entire worldview was crumbling. I believe my people owe you an apology. Margaret's expression softened. Commander, your people don't owe me anything. But that young guard who pushed Kevin might want to think about whether that's the kind of person he wants to be. The meeting ended with what became known as the Margaret Accords, though they were never officially written down. They were simply understood. Children were to be protected. Elders were to be respected. And nobody, anywhere in the galaxy, should ever underestimate the power of a family that extends across the stars. As the ships began to disperse over the following days, aliens throughout the galaxy learned a new truth. Humans were not dangerous because of their weapons or their military might. They were dangerous because they would never ever let family stand alone. Kevin Price grew up hearing the story of the day his grandmother stood up to bullies, and 400 ships came to make sure she didn't have to stand alone. It taught him something that every human child should know. Family means never having to face the universe by yourself. And sometimes that's the most powerful force in the galaxy.